The Witch's Last Breath. A curse that haunts generations. A supernatural horror story. The village of Hollow Ridge sat at the edge of a sprawling forest, isolated from the rest of the world, its roots steeped in history and whispers of the supernatural. For centuries, Hollow Ridge was known for its dark past, specifically the tale of Seraphine, a witch who cursed the village with her dying breath. The curse, once a mere bedtime story, had faded into legend. But Lena Thornton, a young historian from the city, had come to Hollow Ridge to uncover the truth. Lena pulled her coat tighter around her as she stood outside her grandmother's small cottage. She had always loved visiting her grandmother, Eleanor, when she was a child, though the village always seemed to carry an air of gloom, even in the brightest of summers. Now, years later, Lena had returned, not for a family visit, but for research. Eleanor greeted her with a warm hug as she stepped inside. The house smelled of old books, herbs, and something slightly sour, but it was comforting all the same. "You're back," Eleanor said, her voice as raspy as ever. "I figured it was only a matter of time before you came here, asking about the witch." Lena smiled. "You know me well, Grandma. I've always been curious about the legends, and I've heard some strange things about the village lately." Eleanor's expression darkened, her hands trembling as she poured tea. "Strange things indeed. The curse, it was never just a story, Lena. Seraphine's vengeance, it was real. And it's starting again." Lena leaned forward, intrigued. "What do you mean?" Eleanor sighed and gestured to the window, where the forest loomed in the distance. Centuries ago, Seraphine was accused of witchcraft by the villagers. They burned her alive at the stake, but before she died, she uttered a curse, said she'd return one day, and when she did, no one would survive. People have started seeing things again, shadows, hearing whispers in the night. The animals in the forest are acting strange. Some say they've seen Seraphine herself, wandering the woods. Lena shivered despite herself. "Do you really believe that?" Eleanor didn't hesitate. "Ido. And you should too." That night, as Lena lay in the guest room, she thought about her grandmother's words. Seraphine's curse, it seemed too far-fetched. Yet something about the village felt wrong. The stillness in the air was unsettling, and the villagers she'd passed on the way to Eleanor's house had looked at her with suspicious, almost fearful eyes. As she drifted to sleep, a sound stirred her awake. A faint whisper, as if someone was calling her name. Her heart raced. Lena sat up, straining to hear. The wind outside rustled the trees, but there it was again, soft, indistinct, but unmistakable. She cautiously opened the window and peered outside. The forest loomed ominously, and the moon bathed the village in a ghostly glow. But the whispers, they were coming from the woods. Her pulse quickened. Was it just her imagination, or was something, or someone, really out there? The next morning, Lena couldn't shake the eerie feeling that had gripped her the night before. The whispers she heard, it was too vivid to dismiss as a dream. Determined to learn more, she headed to the village archives, located in the basement of the old town hall. Dust covered the shelves, and the scent of mildew hung in the air as Lena sifted through ancient documents and records. Most of it was mundane, village birth records, land deeds, but then she found a tattered journal. The name on the cover sent a chill down her spine. Father Gregory, 1642. He was the priest who had led the charge against Seraphine. The pages were yellowed and brittle, but Lena handled them carefully. The journal detailed the trial and execution of Seraphine, but something caught her eye. Father Gregory described a moment during her execution that hadn't been included in any of the stories she'd heard before. As the flames consumed her, she did not scream, Father Gregory had written. She stared at us, her eyes burning with hatred. "You think you can end me," she said, "but with my last breath I will curse you all. Your descendants will suffer for your sins. When the moon turns blood red, I will return, and none of you will be spared." Lena's breath caught in her throat. A blood-red moon? She had heard rumors that the next lunar eclipse, which would cast the moon in a crimson hue, was due in just a few days. Could the villagers' recent experiences be linked to this ancient curse? She copied the passage into her notebook, her mind racing. If Seraphine's curse was tied to the lunar cycle, then the village could be in danger very soon. She needed more information. Just as she was about to leave the archives, the room grew unnaturally cold. Lena froze, her breath visible in the sudden chill. The shadows in the room seemed to stretch and twist, and from the corner of her eye she saw movement. A figure, a woman, stood at the far end of the room, her dark silhouette almost blending with the shadows. "Who's there?" Lena whispered, her voice barely audible. The figure didn't move, but a cold gust of wind swept through the room, carrying with it a faint whisper, "You cannot stop what's coming." Lena blinked and the figure was gone. Trembling, she gathered her things and rushed back to her grandmother's house, her heart pounding. She had to tell Eleanor what she'd found, and warn the village. That evening, as the sun set behind the dense forest, the whispers returned. This time they weren't just in Lena's mind. The villagers reported hearing them too, low, insistent murmurs carried on the wind, warning of something terrible lurking in the shadows. As Lena sat at the kitchen table with Eleanor, recounting what she'd discovered, a knock at the door startled them both. It was Mayor Arthur Dwyer, his face pale and drawn. "We need your help," he said, his voice shaking. "The village is in danger." The next morning, Lena and Eleanor accompanied Mayor Arthur Dwyer to the village square, where a crowd had already gathered. Panic was in the air, the villagers murmuring nervously amongst themselves. Whispers of Seraphine's curse had resurfaced, and the strange happenings in the village weren't helping. "We can't keep this hidden anymore," Arthur said, addressing the villagers. "People are hearing whispers, seeing shadows. We need to protect ourselves." "What can we do?" an older man in the crowd shouted. "If Seraphine's curse is real, we're doomed." Lena stepped forward. "There may be a way to stop it, but I need more information. I found something in the village archives, an old journal written by Father Gregory, the priest who led the witch's execution. It mentioned that Seraphine's curse would be triggered by a blood-red moon. At the mention of the lunar eclipse, several villagers crossed themselves in fear. It was clear the stories had been passed down through generations, growing darker with each retelling. "We can't rely on old legends," the mayor argued, though his voice lacked conviction. "We need to take practical steps to protect ourselves." "There's someone who might be able to help," Eleanor said suddenly, drawing everyone's attention. "Marcus Blackwood." The name sent a ripple of unease through the crowd. Marcus Blackwood was a reclusive man who lived on the outskirts of the village. Many avoided him, believing his family was tied to the village's dark history. Some even whispered that he had knowledge of the occult. Lena felt a chill run down her spine at the mention of Marcus. She'd heard of him, but she'd never met him. Yet something told her that if anyone knew more about Seraphine, it would be him. "I'll go speak to him," Lena volunteered, surprising herself with her own determination. If she was going to get to the bottom of this, she couldn't let fear hold her back. Later that day, Lena made her way to the Blackwood Manor, an ancient, crumbling estate hidden deep in the woods. The path to the house was overgrown, the trees towering overhead, casting long shadows. Every step felt heavier than the last, as if something unseen was watching her. The house itself was eerie, its windows dark and covered in grime. Lena hesitated at the entrance, taking a deep breath before knocking on the door. After a few moments, the door creaked open, revealing Marcus Blackwood. He was tall, with piercing dark eyes and graying hair that framed a gaunt, pale face. There was something unsettling about his presence, though he didn't seem outwardly threatening. "You've come to ask about Seraphine, haven't you?" he said before she could speak, his voice low and calm, yet filled with an odd intensity. Lena nodded. "You know about the curse?" "I know more than the villagers would like to believe," Marcus replied, stepping aside to let her in. "My family has kept records of the witch's trial and execution for centuries. What you found in the archives is just a small piece of the story. The inside of Blackwood Manor was even more unsettling than the exterior. The walls were lined with ancient books, strange symbols were carved into the wood, and the air smelled of dust and decay. Marcus led Lena to a large, dimly lit room where a single book lay open on a table. "This is the Blackwood Grimoire," Marcus said, motioning to the ancient tome. "It contains the truth about Seraphine." Lena leaned over to examine the pages, but before she could read much, Marcus spoke again. "She wasn't just any witch. She was more powerful than anyone knew, and her curse, it's not just a threat. It's a promise. When the blood moon rises, Seraphine's spirit will fully return, and she will exact her vengeance on the village." Lena felt a knot form in her stomach. "Is there any way to stop her?" Marcus hesitated, his eyes darkening. "There is, but it requires something dangerous." "What is it?" "You have to find the talisman buried with Seraphine. It's the key to her power, but it's also the key to stopping her." Lena's heart raced. "Where is she buried?" Marcus's voice lowered to a whisper. "In the woods, near the old execution site. But be warned, Seraphine will protect it with everything she has." That night, the village was unusually quiet. The usual sounds of chirping crickets and rustling leaves had fallen silent, leaving an eerie stillness in the air. Lena couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her, even in the safety of her grandmother's home. Eleanor, sensing her granddaughter's unease, brewed a pot of tea and sat down across from her. "You saw Marcus, didn't you?" Lena nodded. "He told me about the talisman buried with Seraphine. He thinks it's the key to stopping her." Eleanor's face paled. "The talisman? I've heard of it, but no one has ever been able to find it." "We have to try," Lena said firmly. "If Seraphine's spirit returns with the blood moon, there's no telling what will happen." Before Eleanor could respond, a knock came at the door. It was Jasper Lee, the local teenager who had been experiencing strange visions ever since the whispers began. "I need to talk to you," Jasper said, his eyes wide and panicked. "Something's happening to me." Lena led him inside, and Jasper immediately began pacing the room, his hands shaking. "I've been seeing her," Jasper whispered, his voice trembling. "Seraphine, in my dreams. She's showing me things, horrible things. It's like she's inside my head, warning me of what's coming." Lena exchanged a worried glance with Eleanor. "What did you see?" Jasper stopped pacing and closed his eyes, as if recalling the images in his mind. Fire, darkness, the village burning, people running, screaming. And Seraphine, she was laughing. It felt so real, like it was happening right in front of me. Eleanor clutched her teacup tightly, her knuckles white. "It's the curse. She's trying to make you see what's coming." Jasper looked at Lena, desperation in his eyes. "I don't want to be a part of this. But every night the visions get worse. She's getting stronger." Lena's mind raced. The blood moon was only a few nights away, and it was clear that Seraphine's power was growing. If Jasper's visions were any indication, the village didn't have much time left. "We need to find that talisman," Lena said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides. "If we don't stop her, no one in this village will survive." Jasper nodded, though his fear was palpable. "I'll help. I don't know what else to do." With the blood moon drawing nearer, Lena, Eleanor, and Jasper prepared for their dangerous journey into the woods. They would have to find Seraphine's grave and retrieve the talisman before it was too late. But as they stepped out into the night, Lena couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking straight into a trap. Seraphine's curse was already at work, and the witch's vengeance was far from over. The night of the blood moon was only 2 days away, and the weight of the village's fate pressed heavily on Lena's shoulders. With Eleanor and Jasper by her side, she ventured into the dark forest. The trees, once familiar, now seemed to close in around them, their twisted branches like skeletal hands reaching out to snatch them. "Are you sure about this?" Jasper asked, his voice trembling as they walked deeper into the woods. Lena nodded, her grip tightening on the flashlight in her hand. "We have no choice. If we don't find that talisman, Seraphine will come for all of us." They walked in silence for what felt like hours, the only sound the crunch of dead leaves underfoot. The moon, though still silver, cast an eerie light over the forest, elongating their shadows. Lena could feel the oppressive weight of something watching them, lurking just beyond the trees. As they neared the old execution site, a cold wind swept through the forest, carrying with it the faintest whisper. Lena stopped, her breath catching in her throat. It wasn't just the wind. The whispers were real and they were growing louder. "We're close," Eleanor whispered, her eyes scanning the trees. "I can feel it." Ahead, the clearing opened up, revealing a circle of charred earth, the place where Seraphine had been burned at the stake centuries ago. Lena's stomach churned as she imagined the villagers gathering around to witness the witch's execution, their faces twisted in hatred and fear. "This is where it happened," Eleanor said, her voice barely audible. "This is where she died." Jasper took a step forward, his eyes wide with fear and awe. "Do you think the talisman is buried here?" Lena knelt down and began to clear away the dead leaves and dirt, her fingers trembling. "It has to be." Marcus said it was buried with her. As they worked, a strange mist began to rise from the ground, swirling around their feet. The temperature plummeted, and Lena could see her breath in the cold air. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, until they were a cacophony of voices, all speaking at once. Suddenly Jasper let out a sharp cry. "I see her." Lena's head snapped up. Jasper was staring into the trees, his face pale as a ghost. "She's there, watching us." Lena followed his gaze and her blood ran cold. A figure stood at the edge of the clearing, a woman, her skin pale as death, her eyes glowing with a sinister light. It was Seraphine. "Leave this place," the witch's voice echoed, though her lips didn't move. "You cannot stop what is already done." Lena's heart pounded in her chest, but she forced herself to stand. "We're not leaving until we find the talisman." Seraphine's form seemed to flicker, her eyes narrowing. "You think a piece of metal will save you? You are fools. The blood moon rises and with it my power. None of you will survive." The wind howled, whipping through the trees and sending chills down their spines. But Lena wasn't backing down. "We'll find it and we'll stop you." Seraphine's form began to fade into the mist, but her voice lingered, cold and mocking. "You are too late." As the witch's presence dissipated, Lena resumed digging, her hands moving frantically. After what felt like an eternity, her fingers brushed against something hard and metallic. "I found it," she exclaimed, pulling the object from the earth. It was an ancient talisman, a small, intricately carved disc with strange symbols etched into its surface. The moment Lena held it in her hands, a surge of power shot through her, as if the talisman itself was alive. "This is it," Eleanor whispered, staring at the object with wide eyes. "This is what will stop her." But as Lena held the talisman, she felt an overwhelming sense of dread. The air grew colder and the whispers returned, more menacing than before. "We need to get out of here," Jasper said, his voice shaking. "Now." They turned to leave, but the mist thickened, swirling around them like a living thing, trapping them in the clearing. The ground beneath their feet began to tremble, and from the shadows, they heard the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, and growing closer. Lena's heart raced as the mist closed in around them, and the ground trembled beneath their feet. The footsteps grew louder, echoing in the eerie silence, and it was clear they weren't alone anymore. "We need to move," Jasper shouted, his voice tinged with panic. Lena gripped the talisman tightly, but the mist was suffocating, making it impossible to see. The footsteps grew closer, and then from the darkness, a figure emerged. It was Marcus Blackwood. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his voice low and filled with warning. His face was pale, and his eyes held a strange intensity. "Seraphine's curse is not something you can fight with ancient relics." Lena took a step back, clutching the talisman. "You told me this was the key to stopping her." Marcus smiled, but it was cold and unsettling. "I told you it was a way, but there are forces at work here far greater than you realize." Seraphine's power is tied to more than just this talisman. Eleanor stepped forward, her eyes narrowed. What do you mean? Marcus glanced at the clearing where Seraphine had been executed centuries ago. Her spirit is bound to this place, to the very ground soaked with her blood. You think the talisman will stop her, but in truth, it may only make her stronger. Lena's pulse quickened. Stronger? How? By holding the talisman, you've connected yourself to her, Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. She'll use that connection to complete her return. The blood moon is a gateway, and once it rises, she'll come for you. Lena felt a chill creep up her spine. So what are we supposed to do? Just let her take us. Marcus hesitated, his expression grim. There may be another way, but it comes at a price. What price? Eleanor asked, suspicion lacing her voice. Marcus met Lena's gaze, his eyes dark with intent. A life for a life. If one of you offers yourself willingly, the curse will be broken. But the blood moon is almost here. You have to decide soon. Lena's stomach churned. You can't be serious. Marcus stepped closer, his voice soft but firm. Seraphine wants vengeance, not just on the village, but on those who wronged her. She wants a sacrifice, someone with a pure heart. If you give her that, she may be appeased. Jasper, who had been silent until now, shook his head. We can't sacrifice anyone. There has to be another way. Marcus sighed, his gaze hardening. I've spent my life studying this curse, trying to find a way to stop it. Believe me, I've tried everything. This is the only way. Lena's mind raced. Could she really offer someone's life to save the village? The weight of the talisman in her hand felt heavier than ever, as if it were absorbing her fear, her hesitation. Eleanor placed a hand on Lena's shoulder. We'll find another way. We always do. But as the mist thickened around them, Lena couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out, and that Marcus's offer might be the only chance they had left. As the night of the blood moon approached, a suffocating tension gripped the village. Lena, Eleanor, and Jasper returned to the village square to find the streets deserted. Most of the villagers had barricaded themselves in their homes, terrified of the impending curse. The sky had already begun to darken, and a reddish hue crept into the horizon, a chilling reminder that the blood moon was nearly upon them. Lena stood at the edge of the square, clutching the talisman tightly in her hands. It seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy, and every time she glanced at it, she felt the presence of Seraphine growing stronger. We need to decide what to do, Jasper said, his voice trembling as he looked at the darkening sky. If Marcus was right and this talisman is connecting you to her, then... Lena didn't respond. The weight of Marcus's warning hung over her like a dark cloud. A life for a life. Was that truly the only way to stop Seraphine? Could she bring herself to make such a sacrifice? There has to be another way, Eleanor said, her eyes filled with determination. Seraphine's spirit may be powerful, but she was human once. There's still a chance to break the curse without bloodshed. Lena wanted to believe her grandmother, but the fear gnawing at her insides made it difficult. The air around them had grown colder, and the whispers were back, low, insistent murmurs that seemed to come from every direction. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was Marcus, his expression grim as he approached the group. You're running out of time, Marcus said. The blood moon is almost here. If you don't act now, Seraphine will take what she wants. Lena's jaw tightened. We won't let her take anyone. Marcus sighed, his eyes flickering with something that resembled pity. I admire your resolve, but you don't understand the depth of her power. She's waited centuries for this moment, and she won't be denied. Lena turned to Eleanor, her voice pleading. What do we do? Eleanor's eyes narrowed as she faced Marcus. We'll confront her. We'll use the talisman, but we won't offer any lives. We'll face her together and we'll break the curse. Marcus's expression darkened. You're making a mistake. But there was no time left to debate. As they stood in the village square, the sky above them shifted. The moon, now fully risen, was bathed in a blood-red glow, casting an eerie light over the village. The air became thick with an unnatural energy, and a cold wind swept through the streets. From the shadows, a figure materialized, Seraphine. Her ghostly form hovered above the ground, her eyes glowing with malevolent fire. The whispers grew louder, swirling around her like a storm, and the village seemed to tremble beneath her power. "You've come to stop me," Seraphine's voice echoed, her words dripping with venom. "But you are too late. The blood moon has risen, and my vengeance is complete." Lena stepped forward, the talisman clutched tightly in her hand. "We won't let you hurt anyone." Seraphine's eyes narrowed, her gaze locking onto the talisman. "That trinket won't save you. You think you can defy me? You who carry the blood of those who betrayed me." Lena's heart raced. "What do you mean?" Seraphine's laughter was cold and hollow. "Your ancestors were among those who condemned me. It is their bloodline I seek. You are bound to this curse, Lena. You were always meant to be my sacrifice." The revelation hit Lena like a blow to the chest. Her family was part of the curse? Her own blood had played a role in Seraphine's execution? Before Lena could react, the ground beneath them began to shake. The wind howled, and the red light of the moon intensified. Seraphine's form grew larger, more powerful, and the village seemed to warp around her, as if reality itself was bending to her will. As Seraphine's power surged, Lena felt the talisman pulse in her hands, its energy resonating with the blood moon above. The whispers grew deafening, and she could feel the weight of her family's past pressing down on her. She had unknowingly become part of Seraphine's plan, destined to be the final sacrifice to complete the witch's curse. But Lena refused to accept it. "No," she shouted, stepping forward, her voice cutting through the chaos. "You don't control me. I won't let my family's past define my future." Seraphine's eyes blazed with fury, her form flickering in and out of existence as her power swelled. "You think you can defy me, child? You think you can escape your fate?" Lena's hands trembled, but she stood her ground. She could feel the talisman's energy coursing through her, and in that moment she understood. The talisman wasn't just a tool of destruction, it was a tool of choice. It could either be used to empower Seraphine, or to break her hold on the village once and for all. Eleanor stepped beside her, her voice calm but firm. "Seraphine, you've suffered enough. Let go of this anger. You don't need to continue this cycle of pain." The witch's expression twisted in rage. "Suffered enough? I was betrayed, burned alive, my name cursed for generations. They took everything from me." Lena raised the talisman, feeling its warmth in her hands. "And if you continue this, you'll take everything from us. You've had your vengeance. Now let it end." Seraphine hesitated, her ghostly form flickering again, as if the very fabric of her existence was unraveling. The whispers around them grew quieter, and for a moment the air stilled. But Seraphine's fury flared once more, her voice rising in a scream that echoed through the village. "I will not be denied." The ground cracked beneath them, and the red light of the blood moon blazed even brighter. Lena could feel the pull of the curse, the darkness threatening to consume her, but she fought against it. She held the talisman high, its symbols glowing in the blood-red light. With a final surge of determination, Lena focused all her energy on the talisman. "This ends now." A brilliant flash of light erupted from the talisman, cutting through the darkness and blinding everyone around. Seraphine let out a wail of agony, her form dissolving into the light, her screams fading into the wind. As the light faded, the village fell silent. The blood moon, once a sinister red, returned to its normal silver hue. The whispers were gone, and the oppressive weight that had hung over the village for centuries lifted. Lena collapsed to her knees, the talisman still warm in her hands. Seraphine was gone. The curse was broken. Eleanor knelt beside her, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You did it, Lena." Jasper, who had watched in stunned silence, finally found his voice. "Is it really over?" Lena nodded, though exhaustion weighed heavy on her. "It's over." The villagers slowly emerged from their homes, their faces filled with a mixture of relief and disbelief. The curse that had haunted them for generations had finally been lifted. As the first rays of dawn began to break over the horizon, Lena looked down at the talisman in her hands. It had saved them, but it had also carried the weight of her family's dark past. She knew that the village would never forget Seraphine, but now they could finally move forward, free from the shadow of the witch's curse. The last remnants of Seraphine's power faded into the wind, and with it, the haunting legacy of Blackwood Village was laid to rest. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to like the video, share it with others, and subscribe for more terrifying tales. Explore our playlist of supernatural horror stories for more spine-chilling adventures. See you in the next story.